The galaxy was not as peaceful as it seemed from a distance. Entire worlds burned in silence, their ashes drifting like dust in endless black. Among the survivors, whispers carried stories of betrayal, broken alliances, and abandoned rulers who once commanded armies but were now left alone to die. It was in this cruel galaxy that the young alien princess found herself watching her empire collapse before her eyes. Her people had turned their backs, and even her most trusted allies scattered into the void. She had been abandoned by everyone she once believed in, everyone except the unexpected presence of a single human. Her world, once proud and shining with towers of crystal and oceans that shimmered under two suns, was now nothing more than ruins. She had been raised to believe her empire was untouchable. Her commanders told her their fleets were unmatched, their weapons stronger than anything the stars could throw at them. But the war came fast, not like storms she had been warned about, but like fire that spread too quickly to contain. Enemies who once bowed before her father's throne now rose with sharpened blades and whispered words of revenge. In only days, everything changed. The war was not only unexpected, it was unfair. The alien princess was still young, still learning what it meant to lead when the attack came. She had begged her council to stand firm, to rally the fleets, but they only looked at one another with fear in their eyes. Instead of courage, she saw cowardice. One by one, they withdrew their promises. Her fleets broke apart. Her captains vanished into the darkness. Even her closest guards abandoned their posts. In a single night, she was left with nothing but her crown and the crushing truth that no one would fight for her. The invasion fell like a shadow. Cities burned under enemy fire, and temples once filled with songs now collapsed into dust. She ran through broken corridors, her gown torn, her hands stained with ash, as explosions shook the palace around her. The screams of her people echoed in her ears. But worse than the sound of destruction was the silence that followed when her last allies deserted her. She was not only a princess without an army, she was a ruler without hope, on the edge of defeat. She was captured, not by her enemies, but by the emptiness of despair. She fled into the wastelands beyond the palace walls, walking alone through sand that burned under twin suns. The once loyal banners of her empire now lay scattered in the dirt. She collapsed beneath a jagged rock, her chest rising with shallow breaths, her eyes staring into a future she could no longer imagine. And then he appeared. He did not come in a shining ship or with weapons of war. He was a human, dressed in simple armor worn with scratches, carrying supplies across the desert, as though survival itself had become his only mission. At first she thought he was a mirage, some cruel trick her tired mind had created to keep her alive for a few more breaths, but he was real. His boots left marks in the sand. His shadow fell across her trembling figure, and his hand reached out to her. She looked up at him with eyes that once commanded worlds, but now only begged for mercy. She expected him to turn away like all the others. After all, humans were not known in her galaxy as powerful or dominant. They were whispers, outsiders, often dismissed as weak. But instead of leaving her to die, he knelt. His voice carried no crown, no authority, only a steady calm as he offered her water from his flask. "You're not alone," he said simply. The words hit her harder than any weapon ever could. She was not used to kindness without demand. In her world, loyalty always came with conditions, with promises of power, wealth, or territory. But this human, this stranger, asked for nothing. He gave without expecting. It was so alien to her that she could barely understand it, yet so human that it brought tears to her eyes. The war still raged beyond the horizon. Enemies still searched for her, hoping to finish what they had started. The galaxy had abandoned her, left her to vanish, like another forgotten star in history. Yet here was this human, standing beside her, a shield against the darkness. He had no fleet, no throne, no riches, But in that moment, he was worth more than every ally she had ever lost. The alien princess realized something then, something that would change not just her destiny, but perhaps the destiny of the galaxy itself. In her lowest hour, when empires had fallen and hope had shattered, the one who came to her aid was not a general, not a king, not even one of her own kind. It was a human dot, and though she did not yet understand why, she felt a spark ignite inside her chest, a spark that whispered she was not as alone as she thought. The desert stretched endlessly, its sands glowing under the heat of twin suns. The alien princess tried to stand, but her legs shook beneath her, weakened by hunger and exhaustion. The human steadied her, his hand firm yet gentle as he pulled her to her feet. She had been raised with pride, never depending on anyone, yet now her survival rested in the hands of someone her people had once called insignificant. The princess studied him as they walked across the dunes. His armor was scratched and dented, nothing like the shining suits of her elite guards. His weapons were few, only a rifle slung across his back and a blade at his side. But there was a strength in the way he moved, not the strength of power or wealth, but of someone who had learned to endure. Every step he took was steady, unbroken by the weight of fear. He walked as if he had seen death before and had chosen to keep moving. She wondered why he had helped her. In her empire, kindness was rare. Every act came with expectation. Every gift came with a hidden cost. But he had asked for nothing, not even her name. Finally, her voice cracked the silence. "Why do you help me? You don't even know who I am." He did not stop walking. His eyes scanned the horizon for threats as he replied, "Because you needed help, that's enough." The words confused her. They were simple, almost too simple, but there was no deceit in them. For the first time in her life, she felt small, not because she had been abandoned, but because she realized how little she understood about humans. Hours passed. The heat beat down on them until the rocks themselves seemed to glow. The princess stumbled again, her throat dry, her body weak. Without hesitation, the human offered her another drink from his flask. She hesitated, pride warring against her thirst. But her body betrayed her, and she accepted. The water tasted like life itself, and with it came shame. She was a princess who once ruled over entire fleets, now relying on a stranger for survival. As the suns began to sink, the shadows of jagged cliffs offered relief. The human guided her into the shade of a rock formation and set down his pack. He gathered a small fire from scraps of fuel and lit it with practiced ease. The princess sat across from him, her silver gown torn, her crown long lost, looking nothing like the ruler she had been. The firelight reflected off her pale skin, and for a moment, she felt like nothing more than another refugee. She thought about her people, about how quickly they had abandoned her. Were they cowards, or had they seen her as weak? The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. She wondered if perhaps she had been foolish to ever trust them. The human broke the silence. "You're running from someone. More than one." His voice was not a question. It was an observation. She lowered her eyes, unsure how much she should reveal. But something in his calm gaze urged her to speak. "They came for my world. My council promised they would fight, but they fled instead. My armies broke apart. My people scattered. My throne is gone." The human listened without judgment. He did not offer pity, nor did he seem impressed. He only nodded, as though her story was another truth of the galaxy, one of many he had heard before. "Then you're not running," he said. "You're surviving. That's different." His words startled her. To her, survival had felt like defeat, but to him, survival was strength. He saw something she could not see in herself. She stared at him in silence, realizing that this human carried wisdom her own advisors never gave. The night grew colder. The desert, once a furnace, turned into ice. The human offered her his cloak, wrapping it around her shoulders. She felt its warmth and wondered how someone with so little could give so much. Sleep came to her slowly, her mind haunted by images of fire and betrayal. Yet when she closed her eyes, she remembered his words. She was not running. She was surviving. The next morning, the princess woke to the sound of footsteps. The human was already awake, scanning the horizon with his rifle ready. In the distance, faint shadows moved across the sand. Enemy scouts. Fear surged through her. If they found her, the war would end with her death. But the human only tightened his grip on his weapon. His face showed no panic, only calm determination. "They'll keep searching," he said. "But they won't find you. Not while I'm here." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in anything again. And as the suns rose once more, painting the desert in gold, she realized something that made her chest tighten. This human, this stranger, had become the only shield she had left. For the first time since her empire had fallen, the alien princess felt a spark of hope. The desert was silent, but the silence was not empty. It carried the weight of unseen danger. The alien princess felt it in her bones as she sat under the jagged cliffs, her eyes searching the horizon. She could see faint dust trails moving in the distance, like scars across the sand. The enemy scouts were drawing closer. Her heart pounded with dread, each beat reminding her that if they found her, her story would end here. The human stood tall against the morning light, his shadow stretched long across the sand. His rifle rested in his hands, steady as though he had done this many times before. She wondered who he truly was. He was not just a wanderer. His calmness, his sharp eyes, the way he moved with purpose, it all revealed experience. He had faced danger before, and danger had not broken him. The princess rose, clutching the cloak he had given her. "They are searching for me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If they find us, they will kill you too." The human turned his head, his eyes meeting hers with quiet strength. "Then we won't let them find us." It sounded so simple, yet there was no arrogance in his tone. Only certainty. He packed his supplies quickly, every movement efficient. He handed her a small pouch of dried food. She hesitated, ashamed of how helpless she had become, but hunger forced her to accept. She ate in silence while he scanned the cliffs, plotting their path. "We move through the canyons," he said finally. "They'll track easier on open sand. Rocks will cover us." She nodded, though fear gripped her. The canyons were dangerous, filled with sharp turns and deep shadows, but she trusted his judgment more than her own. She followed as he led the way, his steps careful, leaving only faint marks on the sand. The deeper they moved into the canyons, the cooler the air became. Shadows stretched across the narrow paths, and the sound of their footsteps echoed between the stone walls. The princess felt small here, swallowed by the cliffs. But the human moved as though the canyons belonged to him, his hand brushing against the stone, his eyes scanning every corner. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A sharp crack of stone, followed by footsteps. The enemy had entered the canyon. The princess froze, fear clamping her throat. She pressed herself against the rocks, her breath shallow. The human crouched low, his rifle ready, his eyes narrowed. He signaled her with a hand, "Stay quiet." The footsteps grew louder. Voices in a harsh alien tongue echoed through the canyon. They were hunting, their weapons clattering against the stone. The princess could feel the heat of panic rising in her chest. She had been trained to command fleets, to speak in halls of power, but not to hide like prey. The human moved silently, guiding her deeper into the shadows. Every step he took seemed to vanish into the stone, every movement precise. She realized then that he was not just surviving, he was hunting too. They reached a narrow ledge that overlooked a bend in the canyon. Below, 3 enemy scouts marched, cautiously scanning the rocks with sharp eyes. Their armor gleamed under the light, their weapons drawn. The princess gripped the cloak tighter around her shoulders, her heart racing. She turned to the human, her lips trembling. "We can't fight them. They'll kill us." The human's gaze was steady. "We don't fight. We outsmart them." Before she could respond, he picked up a loose stone and tossed it far across the canyon. The rock clattered loudly, bouncing against the walls. The scouts spun around instantly, their weapons raised toward the sound dot. In that brief moment, the human pulled her close and slipped them behind a sharp outcropping of stone. The scouts rushed past, their voices sharp as they chased the false noise. The canyon fell quiet again. The princess exhaled, her body shaking with relief. She looked at him in awe. "How did you?" He gave a faint smile. "Sometimes surviving isn't about strength. It's about misdirection." They continued deeper into the canyon, the sounds of the enemy fading behind them. The path twisted and turned, leading them into a wide cavern where the ceiling opened to the sky. Here, the air was cooler, the ground scattered with strange glowing plants that pulsed with faint light. The princess paused, staring at the beauty hidden in the canyon's heart. For a moment, she forgot the war, the betrayal, the fear. She reached out and touched one of the glowing plants, its light spilling across her pale fingers. It was fragile yet alive, surviving in a place where nothing should. She realized it was a reflection of her own struggle. The human watched her quietly. He did not speak, but his eyes carried something unspoken, something that told her he believed she could endure this, just as the plant endured. But before hope could settle in her chest, a new sound echoed through the canyon, distant but unmistakable. The rumble of engines. The enemy was bringing more than scouts now. The human's face hardened. "They're not giving up." The princess felt fear return, but alongside it was something new: determination. She was no longer just a princess, abandoned by her people. She was someone who still had a chance to survive, and she was not alone anymore. Together, they moved deeper into the shadows, the sound of engines growing louder behind them. The chase had only begun. The engines echoed through the canyon, a low growl that shook the stone walls. The alien princess pressed her back against the rocks, her breath catching in her throat. She had never felt so hunted, not even in the throne room when her council betrayed her. This was different. This was the sound of enemies who would not rest until she was gone. The human crouched low beside her, his rifle steady, his eyes fixed on the canyon's mouth. His movements were calm, deliberate, without panic. He glanced at her, and for a moment, his calmness reached her. She realized he was not only protecting her with weapons, but also with his unshakable presence. "They're bringing machines," he whispered. "More troops too. We can't stay here." She swallowed hard. "But where can we go? They'll surround us." His gaze shifted upward. Jagged cliffs stretched high above them, sharp edges cutting against the bright sky. "We go up." Her heart sank. Climbing those cliffs seemed impossible. She had been raised in palaces, not trained for survival like him. But the fire in his eyes told her there was no other choice. She nodded, forcing courage into her trembling chest. They began the climb. The human led, his hands gripping stone with practiced ease. He moved like someone who had scaled worse. She followed, her fingers slipping on sharp edges, her arms burning with strain. More than once she nearly fell, but each time his hand reached down, steadying her, pulling her upward. Below, the rumble of engines grew louder. Shadows of armored vehicles spread across the canyon floor. Enemy soldiers marched with weapons drawn, their voices harsh as they searched. Halfway up, the princess froze. Her foot slipped, her body dangled dangerously over the cliff face. Fear surged through her, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to let go, to give up. But then she felt his hand wrapped tightly around her wrist. His grip was firm, unyielding. "Look at me," he said, his voice sharp but steady. She forced her eyes upward, meeting his gaze. "You are not falling, not while I'm here. Climb." Something in his voice cut through her fear. It was not a command from a general or the cold order of a counselor. It was raw human belief. She found strength she didn't know she had and pulled herself up again. Step by step, she climbed until finally they reached the ledge. From above, they watched the enemy below. The vehicle stopped at the cavern, soldiers fanning out, scanning the rocks. The princess shivered, clutching the cloak tighter around her shoulders. "They'll find us eventually," she whispered. The human shook his head. "Not if we move first." He led her across the ridge, moving quickly but carefully. The view stretched across the desert, an endless sea of sand broken by mountains in the distance. Somewhere beyond those peaks might be safety. But between here and there was death. The enemy spotted movement. A shout rose from below. Weapons fired, blasts striking the cliffside. Shards of rock exploded around them, dust filling the air. The princess ducked, her heart racing. The human returned fire with calm precision, each shot echoing through the canyon. "Keep moving," he ordered, firing again. They ran across the ridge, the stone narrow beneath their feet. The enemy fire followed them, bright streaks cutting through the sky. The princess stumbled, but the human caught her arm and pulled her along without slowing. His strength seemed endless, his determination unbreakable. At the far end of the ridge, they found another drop. The only way down was steep, but there was no time to hesitate. The human tossed his pack first, then helped her climb down. Blaster fire rained above, but the rocks shielded them. They slipped into another narrow canyon, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind. Breathless, the princess leaned against the stone wall. Her body ached, her lungs burned, but her eyes locked on him. "Why do you keep risking your life for me? You don't even know my name." The human paused, his face shadowed by the cliffs. "Because sometimes one life is worth saving. Even if the galaxy doesn't see it." Her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. To her council, she had been a tool of power. To her enemies, a prize to be destroyed. But to him, she was simply someone worth saving. Before she could respond, the sound of boots pounded closer. The enemy had tracked them again. The human raised his rifle, his expression hard. "They won't stop. Not until you're gone." The princess straightened, her fear slowly turning into fire. She was not a helpless child. She was still a princess, even if her throne was lost. She looked at him with new resolve. "Then let them come. I will not run forever." For the first time, he smiled, not mocking, not forced, but proud. "That's the spirit." The canyon erupted with noise as enemy soldiers rounded the corner. Blasters lit the shadows. The human fired back, his aim sharp, forcing the soldiers into cover. The princess pressed against the rock, her pulse hammering. She had no weapon, no armor, yet her heart surged with determination. She realized this was no longer just his fight. It was theirs. Together, side by side, they faced the storm. The canyon shook with the thunder of blaster fire. The human fired shot after shot, each one precise, keeping the enemy pinned behind jagged rocks. Sparks lit the shadows as bolts struck stone, leaving burns across the walls. The alien princess pressed her back against the cliff, her breath quick and uneven, but her eyes were fixed on him. He stood firm in the chaos, his movements controlled, his face calm even as death hissed through the air. She had seen soldiers before, thousands of them in her empire, but none like him. Her guards had carried polished weapons and golden armor, but they had fled when the war came. This man, with his worn armor and tired eyes, fought as though her life meant more than his own. When the firing paused, silence fell heavy in the canyon. The human reloaded, his hands steady. "They'll try to flank us," he said. The princess tightened her cloak. "Then what do we do?" He glanced at her, his eyes sharp but kind. "We don't let them." Before she could speak, more shadows appeared above the ridge. Enemy soldiers climbing high to rain fire down upon them. The princess gasped. There was no cover left. The human moved instantly. He pushed her toward a gap in the canyon wall. Go! She stumbled into the narrow space, her heart pounding as the battle erupted again. She turned back, unwilling to leave him, but what she saw froze her. He stood against the enemy alone, his rifle blazing, his blade ready when they closed in. He fought like a storm, every movement efficient, every strike purposeful. Yet even as she watched, her chest ached. He was one man, they were many. Sooner or later he would fall. Something inside her broke free then. She was not just a frightened girl running for safety. She was a princess who once commanded fleets, who had once stood before crowds that sang her name. Her crown might be gone, her armies scattered, but her voice remained. And in that moment, she realized she could not abandon the only being who had not abandoned her. She grabbed a loose piece of stone from the ground. It was heavy, sharp-edged, useless compared to the weapons her enemies carried, but it was something. She rushed from the gap, her heart screaming louder than the blaster fire. The human turned in surprise when he saw her beside him, hurling the stone with all her strength. It struck one of the soldiers on the ridge, knocking him off balance. The soldier tumbled down the rocks with a scream, crashing hard against the canyon floor. The human gave her a look, half disbelief, half pride. I told you to run. Her chest rose with fire. And leave you? Never. Something changed in his eyes then. Not pity, not concern, but respect. For the first time, he saw not a helpless princess, but a fighter beside him. Together, they pushed back. The human's rifle blazed, his blade cutting down the closest attackers. The princess hurled stones, distracting enemies and giving him openings. It was a desperate stand, uneven and reckless, but it worked. The enemy faltered. A whistle rang through the canyon, sharp and urgent. The soldiers retreated, dragging their wounded with them. Silence fell again. The only sound was the crackle of burning stone where blaster bolts had struck. The princess collapsed against the wall, her hands trembling. Sweat dripped down her face, her gown torn and stained with dust. She felt like she had been hollowed out, yet her spirit burned brighter than ever. The human lowered his rifle, his shoulders heavy, but his gaze still steady. He looked at her with quiet approval. You've got fight in you after all. She met his eyes, her lips trembling with exhaustion and defiance. Maybe I just needed someone to remind me. He gave the faintest of smiles, the kind that carried more weight than words. For a moment, the war seemed far away. They had survived. But the peace lasted only a breath before the princess spoke again. They won't stop. They'll send more. The Vuru human nodded. Then we keep moving. As the sun sank low, painting the cliffs in fire and gold, they climbed higher into the mountains. The path was steep, the air thin, but each step carried them farther from the enemy. The princess's body screamed with pain, but she pushed on, fueled by something new. Not fear, not despair, but determination. At the peak, they paused. The view stretched for miles: desert, canyons, and distant valleys glowing faintly under the twin suns. But what caught the princess's eye was the faint glimmer of lights in the far distance. A settlement, she pointed, her voice filled with hope. There. Maybe we can find safety. The human studied it with narrowed eyes. Or more danger. But it's worth the risk. They rested briefly at the summit, their backs against the stone, their breaths heavy. The princess looked at him, her heart full of questions she could not voice. Who was he? Why did he fight for her? Why did he care when the entire galaxy had turned away? She did not ask. She only whispered, almost to herself, "You saved me again." He did not look at her. His eyes remained on the horizon, but his voice was steady. "You're not done yet. You have more to live for than you realize." The words settled deep in her chest. For the first time since her world fell, She began to believe them. The journey was far from over. The enemy would come again, stronger, fiercer, unwilling to let her escape. But as the night covered the mountains in shadow, the alien princess knew she was no longer the girl who had fled in despair. She was changing. And the human at her side was the reason. Together, they descended toward the distant lights, unaware that the choices they made now would echo across the galaxy. The settlement lights flickered faintly in the distance as the alien princess and the human descended the mountain path. Each step brought them closer to hope, yet also closer to danger. She clutched the cloak tighter around her shoulders, her body weak from days of fear and travel. The human walked steadily ahead, his rifle across his back, his eyes sharp even in the fading light. He never lowered his guard. As they reached the valley floor, the princess realized the settlement was larger than she expected. Small towers rose from the sand, their lights glowing in the twilight. Yet the closer they came, the more her hope wavered. Would the people here shelter her, or betray her like the rest of the galaxy had? The humans stopped at the edge of the settlement, scanning the guards at the gates. They wore patched armor, not soldiers of an empire, but mercenaries. Their eyes were hard, their hands resting on their weapons as they studied the strangers approaching. The princess's heart sank. If they recognized her, they might deliver her to the enemy for gold. One of the guards stepped forward, his voice rough. "Travelers, state your business." The human spoke before she could. "Shelter, food, rest." The guard's eyes narrowed. "And her?" He tilted his head at the princess. "She looks important." Fear tightened her chest. She wanted to speak, to lie, but the words stuck in her throat. Then the human placed his hand gently at her back, steadying her. His voice was calm, unshaken. "She's with me." For a long moment, silence hung heavy. Then the guard shrugged and waved them through. "Keep your heads low. Trouble won't be tolerated." Inside, the settlement was alive with weary faces and broken dreams. Refugees, traders, scavengers, all survivors of the galaxy's endless wars. No one looked twice at them. Everyone was too busy carrying their own burdens. They found an inn made of stone and steel scraps. The human paid with a few credits, enough for a small room. The princess sat on the narrow bed, her body trembling with relief. For the first time in weeks, she was under a roof. Yet peace was short. She knew the enemy would not stop. They would track her across deserts, mountains, and stars. Her survival was a threat to their victory. She turned to the human, her voice heavy. "They will come here. These people are in danger because of me." The human sat across from her, his rifle resting against the wall. "Then we face them." Here, her eyes widened. One man against an army? He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. Not one man, two. Her chest tightened. She was no soldier, no warrior. But he spoke as if she already carried strength within her. She lowered her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can." He reached out, lifting her chin with gentle fingers until her eyes met his. "You already have." The words broke something inside her. She thought of the canyon, of the stones she had thrown, of the courage that had begun to stir within her. Maybe she was not powerless. Maybe she could fight, not for a throne, not for an empire, but for herself. The attack came at dawn. Engines roared across the valley as enemy ships descended. Soldiers poured into the streets, their weapons raised. The settlement erupted in panic, people running for cover. The princess stood at the inn's doorway, her cloak blowing in the wind. Fear clawed at her heart, but beside her stood the human, calm and unbroken. He raised his rifle and spoke quietly. "Stay with me," the battle exploded. Blaster fire streaked through the streets, striking stone and metal. The human moved like lightning, his shots precise, each one forcing the enemy back. The princess, heart pounding, grabbed a fallen weapon from the ground. It was heavy, its grip strange in her hands, but she lifted it. For the first time, she fought. Not as a princess waiting to be rescued, but as someone who refused to be abandoned again. Side by side with the human, she fired into the enemy ranks. Her aim was clumsy, her arms shaking, but each shot carried the weight of her determination. The battle raged for what felt like hours. The settlement burned, the air thick with smoke and ash, but slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The people of the settlement, inspired by the sight of the human and the alien princess standing together, rose up. Traders, scavengers, refugees, they all grabbed weapons, fighting back against the invaders. The enemy faltered. Their commanders had promised an easy capture, not a rebellion. One by one, they fell, retreating back toward their ships. When the last of them fled into the sky, silence fell over the broken settlement. The princess lowered her weapon, her body trembling with exhaustion. Around her, the people stared, not at her crownless head or her torn gown, but at her courage. The human walked to her side, his rifle still in hand. She looked at him, her voice raw. "We did it." He gave a faint smile. "No, you did." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of something new hope. She had been abandoned by her people, betrayed by her council, hunted across the galaxy. Yet here she stood alive, because one human refused to leave her behind. The settlement. Cheered, not for a princess, not for a human, but for the bond that had been forged between them, a bond stronger than empires, stronger than war. And as the suns rose over the valley, painting the sky in gold, the alien princess realized her future was no longer lost. She was not abandoned. She was not forgotten, that she was saved.